we'll have saluting of the flag. First, please. Paul,
Do you? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading of last month's minutes, please.
The public hearing for proposed local law governing the sale, application, and disposal of waste associated with oil and natural gas exploration, extraction, and storage activities was opened at 7 o'clock. Present were Garrett Sitz, David Grant, Supervisor Jeff Taggart, Highway Superintendent Mark Lang, and Paul Warner. Also present were Eugene Marner, Carol Marner, Brian Brock, William Young, William Degenhart, Elwood Weirheim, Ken Walter, Don Ritz, Liz Zero, Glenn Gattano, Rachel Philip Gattano, John Alessi, Sylvie LeConte, Wendy Swears, Jamie Archibald, Kayma Nelson Bound, Jan Mulroy, Rose Cleveland, Jane Couch, Jason Starr, Pete Bevilacqua, Eric Haneke, Michael Wallace, Cheryl Peterson, Don Hubbard, Shirley Ferguson, Dwight Bruno, and Patricia Coyle. William Young wanted to add the word potentially to the first sentence in section 1. Also, he felt that Franklin would probably not be found to be a suitable site to have a dump. Brian Brock thought there are other issues that should have been addressed first. He provided a list of changes he thought should be made to the proposed law. Kayma Nelson Bound wanted the language of the law to be expanded to include pipelines and compressor stations. Supervisor Jeff Taggart closed the hearing at 7:10. The regular monthly meeting of the Franklin Town Board was called to order by Supervisor Jeff Taggart at 7:10. Also attending was Lisa Hike and Don Smith. The minutes from the April 7th meeting were read. Garrett Sitz made a motion to accept the minutes as read. David Grant seconded the motion, and all present agreed. Ken Walter reported for the Kellogg Franklin Trust. Any expense that the town pays for insurance costs associated with the Kellogg Franklin Trust will be reimbursed to the town. Carol Marner asked the board to order a comprehensive health impact assessment. No action was taken. Don Hubbard asked the board to adopt a resolution of unconditional opposition to a compressor station in the town of Franklin. No action was taken. Mark Lang reported for the highway department. He would like to sell at auction the motor from the truck that was purchased from the county for parts. Garrett Sitz made a motion to sell the motor at auction. David Grant seconded the motion, and all agreed. Chemung Supply Corporation did send a bid on time for the April opening for pipe. They bid the same prices as steel sales for all of the various size pipes. Don Smith made a motion to accept Chemung Supply's bid and to purchase pipe for the most reasonable price. David Grant seconded the motion, and all agreed. Mark received quotes for an excavator. To rent a machine, it would cost $3,490 a month. Also, there's a program to rent with the option to buy the machine. The 2007 machine would cost approximately $72,200, and the 2010 machine would cost approximately $115,000. Garrett Sitz made a motion to rent the 2007 machine for 2 months. David Grant seconded the motion, and all agreed. Garrett Sitz reported for the Recreation Committee. They still need to hire 2 lifeguards for the summer. Vouchers were submitted for audit and payment. With no further business to come before the board, Garrett Sitz moved for adjournment. Lisa Hike seconded the motion, and all agreed.
Any additions or corrections?
I move we accept them as read.
Second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. We're going to go with Ken Walters first, because he seems to always be first on it. Then we'll go to Delta. Yes, Ken.
Okay, 531 NBC checking account, $44,426. Morgan Stanley is $934,740, and I don't have interest in dividends earned because it's too early in the month. Jim Carey and I decided, as a precaution against any possible downturn, that the original Kellogg Trust Fund money was $900,000. I told Matt Zons if it hits 935 or more, sell 35,000 and put it in a basic money market account. Just feel that this is a good way to basically mitigate any downturn in the market. And I want to emphasize that the money market account is as untouchable as the investment portfolio. It can only go back into the portfolio. But we just felt that this was a conservative approach to just make sure that we guard the money as best we can. The Roaring Brook abutment was completed, and I have submitted the completion report to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Connie has a copy. We did add $40,000 worth of contents insurance coverage for the rental space. That's all of the History Center and Community Center. The exact cost of that is $100, and I gave Paul a check for the $100 before the meeting. The biggest news that we basically have is the dugouts. First two were delivered today, second two tomorrow. And we are going to go ahead and spend somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 to repair the tennis courts. It's more a liability issue. I mean, it's not just what we did last year, but this one, it just took its toll, and we don't want somebody tripping. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that done. And that basically is it. Our next board meeting will be June 24th, usual time, 6 o'clock here in the firehouse. And I'll be glad to answer any questions or concerns anyone has.
What became of the inspection of the playground?
Inspection of the playground is pending. There's apparently a new playground being built in Bainbridge. And the inspector says it's going to be done sometime the end of June, early July. When I come down to do that inspection, I'll come to Treadwell and do their playground inspection. And Joanne Smith at Gates Cole has promised me that as soon as she knows the date, she's going to let me know, because Dave Tudhill and Jim Carey would like to be there with him so that they can hear for themselves exactly what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
He probably will also have a lot of good information as to where to buy stuff or where to go and stuff like that. So that's where we stand on that.
Okay. Now I see on your notes here on your that there's the $100 plus the $105 rental fee for the insurance coverage.
Yes, and in talking to Joanne today,
Mm-hmm.
she is confirming that that $105 should be the amount, and I told Paul I will have a check for him at your next board meeting for the $105.
Okay.
We just weren't sure what that amount was going to
Okay,
be.
I just see the 105
Right,
listed
so
here.
far this year.
Yep.
That was
Yep.
what it had been, but apparently that's not going to change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Anybody have any questions for Ken on this subject? Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, now we're going to have a presentation from Delta Engineering on what their proposed overseeing of roads and such are, and take it away.
All right. All right. My name is Steve Sanish, and I'm from Delta Engineers. We're located in Enwell, New York. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's about another 20 minutes west of Binghamton area. And what we have is a program that we set up about 4 or 5 years ago now. We realized that there was going to be some developments coming our way. Obviously, hydrofracking was a possibility at one point. There's still other construction activities such as wind farms and whatnot that may come here. And we said, you know, there's a lot of municipalities out there that don't have any way to protect themselves from that type of unexpected heavy construction traffic. So we came up with this program which lays out a plan for dealing with that, okay? And the main goal is to protect your town's roads. That's what we do. Okay, so if you'll give me about 20 minutes, I can get through this PowerPoint, which should hopefully give you a good explanation of the basics of what we're doing here, and then I can take any questions you have after that. Okay. So, just looking at the first slide here, mitigating damage caused by unplanned concentrated traffic. That's what we're really looking for. The stuff that comes into town unexpectedly, some kind of development that hasn't been through a planning board or some kind of process like that. It just shows up. So our approach, let's talk a little bit about what this program is not before we talk more about what it is, okay? It's a non-biased approach, okay? We're not aimed at regulating any particular industry or business or type of development. Again, we're only here to help you protect your roads, and as I go through this, I'll explain the process of how that works. We're not looking to regulate any of your everyday town traffic, any of your local businesses that are already in place and have been there forever. We're not looking to regulate that. That becomes part of what we call the baseline traffic, and I'll touch on that a little bit as well. What we are trying to do with this program is capture any large spikes in concentrated construction traffic, okay, that have not been planned for and are associated with a specific construction activity. Now, I know that's a big, long definition, but we had to get something in there to kind of explain in one succinct phrase what it is we're trying to do, and I'm going to break that down for you now as we go through. So I'm an engineer, so I have to have at least one graph in here. I promise this is the only one. It's the only one. Okay, so what this is showing you here is this down here represents your everyday traffic. That includes your cars, your trucks, your school buses, all the normal delivery trucks and everything that you have every day. So it's pretty much consistent most of the time within a certain bandwidth. What happens when we see this big development come out of nowhere is you get this spike in your traffic all of a sudden. Not only is there more traffic, but there's also more heavy truck traffic. And of course the heavy truck traffic is the stuff that tends to beat up the local roads more so than your normal passenger vehicles and pickup trucks. So it's this spike here that we're looking out for. Okay, that's what we're concentrating on with this program. So a couple definitions. I mentioned construction activity. Well, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So let me kind of lay it down as to what we consider a construction activity. First of all, it has to have a defined begin date and an end date. So we know when this traffic is going to be coming to your town. Okay. It has to resolve in some kind of land disturbance or improvement to a parcel. In other words, they have to be doing something to physically change that land. Okay. And the proposed development also has to have enough traffic to exceed a predetermined number, okay? And I'll talk about that number a little bit more as we go on. But they have to hit it, in other words, they have to hit a certain amount before this comes into play, okay? Developer, I've used that word a couple times, it may seem obvious, but the developer is the entity responsible for the development. They're the ones at the very top that are overseeing this whole project, okay? So. All right, so how do we do this? This is how we have this set up. We have 3 phases set up to this program, okay? Phase 1 and Phase 2 kind of work together. Phase 3 comes a little bit later on. Phase 1 is basically the process of us getting familiar with your town's roads, okay? We're going to take a look at your roads and see the condition that they're in. We're going to talk with the town supervisor and superintendent and see how the roads are taken care of, what kind of maintenance things you guys do. Phase 2 is a training where we'll have an in-depth discussion on how all this works. There are forms and like I said, there's a process laid out that we go through. And we find that having a process keeps it the same for every type of development that comes through. So we have a well-defined process that we use, and we'll do a training on that in Phase 2. Phase 3 is the most interesting one. That's the one when the development traffic actually comes to town. Now what do? We've got this program in place, we've had the training, how do we implement it, what's involved? So that's the basic overview of the 3 parts, and I'm going to go a little more in depth into each one. So Phase 1, road network assessment. As I already mentioned, we're going to go out and look at your roads. We're physically going to look at your roads. We're going to look at about 20 miles of your roads, a representative cross-section of gravel roads and any paved roads you might have, chip seal roads, to get an idea of kind of the state they're in. Okay, we'll photo document that, we'll video that, so we have a snapshot in time of where they are today, a starting reference point. We'll also meet with any municipal officials that are involved with the roads, usually the highway supers. And another thing we'll do is we'll take traffic counts on some of your roads to see what volume of traffic you guys see on your roads on a normal day. And that, of course, varies greatly from municipality to municipality, which is why we don't just make an assumption. We actually go out and do counts, so we have a real number for here. All that goes into an engineer's report. We summarize all that information, and what that does is it gives you a basis and gives us a basis from which to measure from for the future. Okay, we can say today this is generally how this town does their road work. This is their maintenance program. This is how their roads look. This is the way it looks today, and we can use that down the road to prove, kind of like we want to establish a pattern. This is what this town does. Okay. So phase 2, as I mentioned already, this is where we do the training. We'll come out and we'll do a training for anyone who's going to be involved with the program, the board, you guys. And we'll explain all the little details about the program. We're not going to go through all that tonight because you'll probably start to fall asleep, but we'll do that down the road. There is also a law and a road use agreement component to phase 2. We have a template law and a template road use agreement that comes with the package that you can use either as is or make modifications to tailor your specific needs. So that comes with this as well. And I'm not going to talk about laws tonight. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not really schooled to get in depth with that kind of thing. So we're going to stick to the engineering and to the program that we have. All right, phase 3. Like I said, this is when it gets interesting. This is the business of assessing damage, and that's really what we're doing. We're going to be watching these roads and looking at these roads as the development traffic comes through. And since we took that measurement at the beginning to kind of state here's where there are now, that's going to help us with our basis to measure what damage may come from that traffic later on down the road. So we'll use all that stuff from the phase 1 engineers report to do phase 3. So I'm going to go through the process of phase 3 a little bit, some of the steps, again, not drilling into too much detail. A little bit about the forms that are involved with the program. There is some paperwork. You got to have something to document all this stuff, but it's definitely not overbearing and it's not hard to do. Talk a little bit about how we assess the actual road damage. And then how does that road damage get paid for and repaired? That's always the big question in everyone's mind. Who's paying for this? Okay, I see some thumbs up back there. So we'll cover that, okay? So bear with me. We'll get to there. All right, so from now on, we're just going to concentrate on phase 3. The 3 players in phase 3 are the developer. Okay, they're the ones bringing the construction traffic to town. The municipality, they're involved through the whole process, making a lot of the calls of what's going to happen when, doing the final construction inspection on the roads to make sure they're built back to the way to your town standards. And then of course the engineer, that'd be us. We're going to be providing engineering services for doing the calculations to figure out the damage on the roads, what needs to be done to bring them back to the way they were before they started. And we'll be providing those kinds of engineering services with this package. So those are the 3 players involved here. That's really the point of this slide. So we've got the developer, the town, and then us. All right. When we find out that a construction project is coming to town, the first thing we need to get is some information from the developer. Okay, we need to find out, first of all, what they're planning on building, okay, when they're planning on building it, and how much traffic we're talking about here. Okay, and we actually have, you may or may not be familiar with the Federal Highway Administration has classification ratings on vehicles. There's 14 different classes of trucks, cars, SUVs. They actually have to provide us with the information of how much of each they plan on using to do the work that they're going to do. Okay, we use that as our basis going forward to start getting a feel for what they're bringing to town and how much traffic we're talking about. It's a relatively short 3-page document, and our experience so far has been that most of these guys doing this big development pretty much have their stuff together. They have to. They're there to do their job, make money, and go home. So they usually have their ducks in a row. So getting this information out of them is not usually a problem. But that's the first thing that needs to happen, is we get that beginning information from them so we know what it is we're dealing with. Now the second thing will be, when we get that information back, now we got to assess it. And the first question we have to ask ourselves is there enough traffic here to even worry about? Okay, is it a big enough project that it's really going to cause damage on your roads? Okay, so we have what's called the minimum impact evaluation form, and the purpose of that is to determine if the amount of proposed developer traffic is enough to warrant further investigation or regulation. Okay, it could be that a traffic doesn't hit that number I talked about at the beginning. And we'll talk about that number in a little bit, but let's say the number is 100. Let's say they come in at 70 or 80. That may not be enough to worry about it any further. So we're going to let that one go. Okay, it's not a significant amount of traffic. But if they do pass that threshold, then the rest of this kicks in. Okay. A couple things that come up. We measure that traffic in terms of easels. And what that means is that stands for equivalent single axle load. That's equivalent to 18,000 pounds on a single axle, the force that it exerts on the road. Okay? And the only reason I bring this up is not to confuse or get too engineer on you, but because remember before I mentioned we got all those different classes of trucks. Well, they all have different carrying capacities, weight capacities, and all that. The easel is kind of a common denominator. We can take all that different kind of traffic and boil it down to a single easel number, and that's how we can compare it to that threshold to see if we're even at the point of regulating or not. Okay. And that threshold I've been talking about, we actually call it the minimum impact threshold, or the MIT. That's the number that's predetermined by the town, and we work with them to set that number and say that that 100 easels is going to be the magic number that the developer has to have as far as his traffic for this to engage. Okay. Otherwise, it's not worth our time, it's not their time, it's not worth the paperwork. We let it slide. Okay. So, the first thing we're going to do, and this is a little piece of that form. These are the FH, I know you can't see this from there, but the FHWA classes are listed here. Then we would write in the number of vehicles for each of those classes they have here. The Federal Highway Administration gives us factors that we can multiply that by to come up with the easels, that common unit that I talked about. That gets us our total number of easels. And what we're going to do first is look at the whole project. Say for this whole project he's got 2,000 easels. Okay? So, okay, there's enough traffic here. That's above, let's say, 100 threshold that we picked. And we're going to go ahead with this. But we're going to use this form again. Okay? Now we're going to take all that traffic that they're proposing. At this point, we should know what roads they're going to be traveling on. That's part of that initial information that we get from them. Matter of fact, what we usually do is we give them a town map. If they don't have one already, a lot of these guys already have one GIS downloaded and they have all their truck routes on there. But some of them don't, so we give them a map. They highlight on there for us where they're taking the traffic and what types of trucks on which roads. Because just because there's 2,000 easels worth of trucks doesn't mean that all 2,000 easels is going to be traveling on every road. Okay, so what we do now is we split that up into the specific roads that each, all the different types of traffic are going on, and see if those roads have enough traffic on them to be worried about. So we're kind of weeding down the road to the roads that we really think are going to be affected by the larger amount of traffic. So we're not wasting time on roads that might see 2 extra dump trucks. Okay, it's not going to cause the same kind of damage as something that's got 200 dump trucks going on it. Okay. And that's the only math that the municipality has to do, is that little chart right there. And of course, we'll check it and make sure everything's good. To give an example, I know talking about easels is probably foreign to most of you, and how many trucks is a lot, how many is little. To give you kind of an idea, this is the FHWA classifications I talked about. Motorcycles, cars, trucks, and then you get up into your class 5 and your class 6. Now you're starting to get into your single axle and your double axle dump trucks. Okay, that's where we start really considering it heavy truck traffic. What this is here is this is a listing of the classification ratings. Okay, and let's say for example our threshold, our minimum impact threshold that we mentioned is actually 50. This is how many of each of those classes you would need to hit 50 easels. So for example, a class 6 would be your double axle dump truck or cement truck. You would need 119 trucks for it to hit the 50 easel threshold before it would even need to be regulated. So if you've only got 50 trucks going there, not something that's probably going to cause enough damage we have to worry about. Well, you get up to 120 trucks, now we got a substantial amount of traffic we got to watch. And just for those, in case there's any truckers out there, I always get this question. This is figured on a round trip to and from the site. That's considered one trip, and it's also considered to be fully loaded one way and empty on the way back. Okay, that's what those factors that we saw on the previous sheet take into consideration. Okay, so one trip is there and back, round trip, loaded one way, empty the other way. Okay, so we get that haul route information from the developer. We know where they're going now. We know what kind of traffic they're carrying. We know what kind of development they want to do. What are we going to do? We're going to go out and evaluate the current conditions of the road. okay, on just those roads that they're going to be using. Not every road in the town, just the ones we know that they're going to be putting traffic on, because it could have changed from last year or 6 months ago from when we looked at it a little bit. It could have been upgraded. Maybe you guys did a chip seal on it this summer, that kind of thing. So we're going to go out and do a current evaluation of the road. And some of the things we do, we take corings, okay? Corings, they actually drill down the road about 4 feet and figure out what's in that roadway. Well, what layers do you have in there? You have some native soil and maybe some gravel on top, maybe a chip seal layer on top of that, maybe some kind of pavement. So we'll do that at specific spots on the roads that they're going to be using to have something we can look at and measure and say, this is what is there, okay? We'll also identify and inspect bridges and culverts if there's any on those roads, if there's any that belong to you, okay? We'll look at that and assess them, see if they need to be upgraded or what might need, or if they're okay to be used for what they want to do. And we'll provide those recommendations after we look at that to municipality to move forward. Now, there's 2 different ways this can go. Either the road can look like it can handle this, and we're okay, we're just going to monitor it, or it looks like this road is definitely not going to be able to handle this traffic. So what do? Well, if it looks like it appears that it can likely handle it, although we expect that there might be some damage, we're going to set up some kind of monitoring plan, okay? That might be corings before and corings after. That way we can measure the difference in the road materials before they use the road and after they use the road. We do video logging. We'll go on video with GPS, so we have a documented visual of the whole roadway, and then we can do that again afterwards. Okay, that can give us a good comparison of the road surface at least, before and after. Ground penetrating radar, that's actually a truck that uses radar to shoot down in the ground and gives you a picture of what's going on in there. We haven't used that often, but it is another tool that is out there. And then we also do visual on the ground inspections. If hired to do this, then I'll actually be out on your town roads for 2 or 3 days, and you'll see me run around in my white truck, and I'll be going 10 times up and down the same road, and I'm looking at different cracks, different types of cracking in the road, any dips, any bumps, all that kind of stuff. We photograph that, and we also give the road a grade on a 0 to 100 scale, so to speak. So we go out there and do a visual on-site assessment. And then we'll monitor that road while it's being used by the developer. Okay, usually some kind of weekly inspection or something like that. We'll go out there, take a look at, maybe identify if there's any problem areas that need some attention, or if things are looking okay. And, that threshold for how much is allowable and not allowable, we determine with the town. How much quote-unquote damage will allow to happen before it needs to be fixed. Okay. Now, if it appears that the road's going to fail, before, we know right away they want to go on a single lane gravel graded road with 200 dump trucks, okay, then we can propose and come up with a plan for an actual upgrade to the road before they use it, okay? So basically 2 ways we can do this. Either we upgrade the road before, or we allow them to go forward understanding that some damage is going to happen, but we're going to monitor that damage. And they'll have to repair it either as they go along or when they're done using it, depending on the severity and depending what we work out with the town specifically. But that's a lot of our involvement right there, is providing that part to you.